Carroll Shelby died with the world convinced it had the full picture. The records, the interviews, the auction results, the museum collections, decades of documentation had assembled what felt like a complete and sealed account of the man. A chicken farmer from Leesburg, Texas, who became one of the most influential figures in American motorsport history. A racer, a fabricator, and a builder who spent 60 years demonstrating that the fastest path to history was to ignore everyone telling you to slow down. And then, after his death in 2012, an unmarked door opened in rural Texas, and everything the automotive world believed it understood about his legacy became considerably more uncertain. Nobody had entered that warehouse in years, not journalists, not collectors, not even most of the people who had worked alongside Shelby during the final stretch of his career. The building sat on private land, low profile and utilitarian, the kind of structure designed not to attract attention. When estate workers finally stepped inside and pulled back a plain gray canvas cover, what sat underneath appeared in no official inventory, carried no VIN matching any documented Shelby project, and wore no badge connecting it to anyone. Just a wrinkled paper tag tied to the steering column with 4 words, EXP Shelby, do not move. Carroll Shelby's public legacy already had a home, a carefully maintained display space in Las Vegas that drew visitors from across the world, polished Cobras and signed GT350s arranged under the kind of institutional lighting that signals cultural permanence. Every piece cataloged, every car documented, the whole collection telling a story of 6 decades in racing and fabrication. But that Las Vegas space was always the official version. The other location, the one that never appeared in a brochure or surfaced in an interview, occupied the opposite end of every spectrum. Private land in rural Texas, no photographs, no public record, and a metal door that almost nobody had ever opened. Before any of that, Shelby had already assembled a legacy most people in the automotive world spend entire careers pursuing. Born in Texas, he came to racing through an improbable sequence. A chicken farmer with a dangerous heart condition and an appetite for speed that most people around him treated as a liability. His condition should have ended things before they started. Instead, he kept a nitroglycerin pill inside his driving glove and kept returning to the starting grid, which reveals most of what you need to know about his relationship with limits. By the late 1950s, he had earned genuine respect on the international circuit, and his win at Le Mans in 1959 wasn't circumstance. It was what happens when a driver decides that the gap between ability and belief is the only obstacle worth addressing. Health eventually forced him out of the cockpit, and the obvious response would have been to step back, consult from a comfortable distance, and retire on a reputation already more than adequate. Shelby took none of those options. Instead, he identified an equation in the American automotive industry that nobody had bothered solving. American V8 engines carried serious power. European chassis offered handling precision that American cars couldn't match. Combine those two things properly, and you'd produce something neither continent had managed independently. The result was the Shelby Cobra, a raw and immediate roadster that arrived on the motorsport stage and began beating Ferrari in races the Italian manufacturer had no expectation of losing. Shelby hadn't just built a fast car. He had constructed a rebuttal, and Ferrari, along with the rest of the racing world, had no choice but to acknowledge it. The Ford partnership that followed produced the GT350 and eventually the GT40, and those weren't racing experiments. They were outcomes with a specific target. The GT40 ran at Le Mans in 1966 and defeated Ferrari outright, which had been the intention since Ford's failed acquisition attempt had poisoned the relationship between the two manufacturers. Shelby delivered that result not through committee approval or corporate process, but because he understood what the car needed to do and refused to be argued out of it by the people providing the budget. The accounts from that era are consistent. Shelby walked out of meetings over power restrictions, argued with Ford engineers over weight targets, and established in every room he entered that his name on a car meant his standards were the ones that applied. That friction followed him into every subsequent project. During consulting work on the Dodge Viper, he clashed with engineers over steering feel, weight, and safety specifications. Identical arguments, different decade, different company. Corporate automobile production was something Shelby navigated his whole career not by accepting its terms, but by finding the margins where its authority couldn't reach him. In the late 1990s, with his physical health beginning to deteriorate and the American automotive industry operating under tighter regulation and more cautious management than he had ever worked within, he located one more margin. A private building in rural Texas, a small crew working nights and weekends, sworn to silence. No press, no documentation, and no authorization from Ford or anyone else. A former Shelby American fabricator, speaking without attribution, confirmed Shelby called the project his last wild one. A second unnamed source said the crew's name for it was simpler, the Ghost. Components arrived from test mules, discontinued prototypes, and shelved Ford engineering programs. Each one sourced quietly, each weld completed outside any official record. Shelby reportedly reviewed parts himself and discussed aerodynamics well after the rest of the crew had gone home. One line attributed directly to him captures the operating philosophy behind the whole thing. If Ford doesn't have the guts, I'll do it in my own damn garage. What those sessions produced looked like nothing in the known Shelby catalog. The car found under that canvas was a low, wide coupe. Its roofline dropped considerably below any production model, its body built entirely from hand-shaped aluminum panels, with no mass-produced component among them. The platform underneath came from a heavily modified Fox body Mustang chassis stretched beyond its factory configuration. The engine was a twin-turbocharged V8, a setup Shelby had discussed in concept conversations but never formally committed to, mated to a custom transmission with an experimental rear-mounted cooling system that none of the automotive engineers called in to examine it had encountered before in any Shelby build. Notes in marker on the components read, Shelby EXP V8, twin test rack only. 3 words on the firewall completed it, not for production. Historians brought in to assess the prototype concluded it was built as a successor to the Cobra Daytona Coupe, the closed-body endurance machine from the 1960s that had represented Shelby's clearest expression of what a performance car could be before corporate considerations entered the room. The prototype carried no airbags, no emissions compliance hardware, nothing designed to satisfy a regulatory checklist or a marketing brief. It wasn't built to sell. It existed because Shelby needed to build it, and because a group of fabricators loyal enough and skilled enough helped him do it in complete silence. Most of those people have held that silence even now, out of respect, out of loyalty, and some reportedly out of a belief that what Shelby produced privately was never intended to be explained to anyone outside the building. The legal situation surrounding the car has no simple resolution. Absent from official records, it carries unanswered questions about intellectual property, built under Shelby's name using what appear to be Ford-derived components, without authorization from Ford or any formal paperwork. No registration, no crash test documentation, no compliance records exist. In private collector circles, estimates of its potential auction value have already reached past $10 million, but the car sits unrestored and has not been formally unveiled. Sources connected to Shelby's estate report no immediate plans to display it publicly. Curators at the Shelby Heritage Center have made their interest clear. Others argue the car should stay exactly as discovered, dust, handwritten tags and all, treated as a sealed time capsule from the last years of a remarkable career. Among younger builders and automotive enthusiasts who have followed this story, a name has already attached itself to the car, the black file car, the kind of classified project that reframes everything once it surfaces. What makes this car genuinely difficult to sit with has nothing to do with the engineering or the legal complexity. It's the timing. Shelby built this while his health was declining, while heart complications and mobility problems were narrowing his world, during a period when most men with his standing and his history would have been reflecting rather than fabricating. He didn't produce farewell interviews. He didn't license his name to commemorative editions built on other people's ideas. He went to a building in Texas with a sketch pad and a cutting torch and kept working, exactly what he had done during every other period when the industry had attempted to contain him or define him on its own terms. People close to him in those years described the build as something he poured himself into as his physical world contracted, a project personal in ways his production cars never could be. That reading holds up, because the car carries the character of something made for the maker and no one else. No launch plan, no press strategy, no target demographic. A man, a crew that trusted him enough to stay completely quiet, and a car sitting in a Texas building as the only physical evidence that Carroll Shelby, even at the very end, still had something left to settle, not with Ferrari or Ford, but with himself. The question that remains isn't really about the car. If a figure this thoroughly documented, this deeply embedded in the history of American muscle car culture and international motorsport, this exhaustively written about and collected and archived, still had a room nobody knew about, then the assumption that we've fully accounted for any person's story becomes far less reliable. Shelby gave the world the Cobra, the GT350, the GT40, machines that changed what performance engineering meant and altered the trajectory of racing history. And then, without announcement or permission, he went and built one more. Not for posterity, not for collectors, not for the fans who would have lined up around the block to see it. For himself, in a metal building somewhere in Texas, under fluorescent lights, with marker notes on the parts and a tag on the steering column that told whoever came after exactly what they needed to know. Do not move, as if the car itself still had somewhere left to go.